Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I love seeing everyone's names here, so thank you so much for being here. Let's see here. So today we are going to discuss the 2024 State DOT webinar. Again, my name is Bailey Kraus, and I am joined here by Courtney Springer. Again, if you have any questions as we go through our presentation, please feel free to use that Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. Let's see here. All right. As a disclaimer, the contents of this presentation are intended to provide clarity regarding the existing requirements of the FTA and NTD. Please always feel free to refer to the statutes and regulations for requirements. The goal of this webinar is to identify changes for the upcoming report year and to provide an overview of NTD reporting requirements and how those requirements apply to the system. Again, this presentation has been created specifically for state DOT reporters. If you attended last week's webinar for state subrecipients, it will be very similar in content, but it will include additional state-specific actions such as kickoff and submission steps. Here's the agenda for the afternoon. First, I will do a quick overview of the NTD, then move on to important changes and clarifications for the 2024 report year. Next, we will review the fundamentals of NTD reporting, and we will discuss how to get started in the NTD reporting system. Then Courtney will take over and discuss how to complete the annual report, including some common reporting challenges. Lastly, we'll review the validation and closeout process. So we got a lot to handle today. Here's the contact information for the National Transit Database. If at any point you require technical assistance while completing a report, please always feel free to reach out to your analyst first and foremost. If you do encounter any technical issues with the system, you may also contact the FTA IT help desk or your analyst, and your analyst will try to help you, but ultimately we may reach out to the FTA IT help desk as well. If you need assistance with accessing our published data products, please feel free to email our help desk here between 8 a.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern. Courtney and I contact information is listed here. Please reach out to us if you have any questions about this presentation, or you can also reach out to Reed as well if he's your analyst. In addition to our contact information, we also wanted to provide the FTA program contacts here, which are Chelsea Champlin and Thomas Coleman. The key reference documents for NTD reporting are mostly located here. This will include the policy manual, of which an updated copy for report year 2024 is currently available. The glossary, user guide, and the transit asset management guidebooks are also recorded there, not reported. All right, first, a quick overview of the National Transit Database. So what is the National Transit Database, or NTD? NTD was established to be the nation's primary source of information and statistics on all public transit modes in the United States. It's a source of data for performance measure, benchmarking, as well as research. So who reports? Who reports us? Who are we, talking to daily? We're talking to recipients and subrecipients of Chapter 53 funds. Subrecipients of State 5311 funds report data through their state's report. These subrecipients may include those that have received funding in the past and are still required to report based on continuing grant requirements, as well as some who report voluntarily and wish to receive Chapter 5311 funds in the future. 5311 subrecipients and recipients are required to report due to their grant requirements as stated here from the associated legislation. So Chapter 5335. I know we go over this every year, but NTD data is due on the following dates: October 31st, January 31st, and October 30th. These are the assigned deadlines depending on your agency's reported fiscal year end date. Please note that the last date to submit report revision for your reporting group, after this date, your report will not be sent back for any further revisions, and the report will be closed out as is. All right, now we are going to go over some changes and clarifications for report year 2024 that may affect your report. And if you were in the 2024 clarifications and updates webinar earlier this year, this will sound very, very familiar. First, we want to go over the General Transit Feed Specification, or GTFS, requirement. GTFS data was a new requirement for report year 2023 that required agencies who operate a fixed route mode to upload GTFS data for their service. Each year, agencies must confirm that this link is up to date. That being said, in report year 2024, state DOTs will recertify the current GTFS data in the system and update the current GTFS data if there were any changes to the fixed route service in that year. If any of your subrecipient agencies requested a waiver for this requirement in report year 2023, you will need to make sure you upload their GTFS feed this year. When you go to submit the state's report package, you will now encounter a new page on the submission process that will list the GTFS links in the reporters. You will certify that they are each up to date and active links, and will be a yes, no drop down, and Courtney will be going over this towards the end of the presentation. Great. If any of your subrecipients' fixed route modes have changed, please proceed with updating the GTFS entry to reflect the service changes on the P50 located in the agency's profile. And again, we will go over this later on in the presentation. Great. One last item with the GTFS. If your subrecipients still require assistance with their data, please feel free to use the resources provided by National RTAP, which are included here on this slide. These include their free GTFS builder, as well as open office hours on Thursday between 1 and 1:30 p.m. Eastern. The resources are wonderful. The videos are wonderful. Definitely check those out. All right, the next update, now that we're done with the GTFS updates, but still within the same realm of under the same hat, is the clarification regarding question 8 on the B15 form. So the B15 went over the demand response geospatial data. So, for this, we want to clarify the B15 form should include all of your agency's demand response services, which may include paratransit and dial-a-ride services if you operate both. Question 8 should depict the eligibility of these services for each day of the week. Typically, there should only be yes marked for multiple columns if your agency has multiple services with different eligibility for each. If you only have one service and it includes everyone, then it'll just be general population, for example. Great. Please use this slide as a resource when determining how to report your agency's demand response service eligibility on question 8 of the B15. You can access these definitions on question 8 of the B15 by selecting the blue question mark for each eligibility column. If you are unsure of how to report your services eligibility at the DOT level, please feel free to reach out to your analyst and we can help you out. Another clarification on the B15 form is question 9. And I know you're thinking, Bailey, I don't have this form in front of me. I have no idea what these are. We'll go over them in a little bit with Courtney. But just to provide clarity, question 9 should report the minimum advanced reservation time for your agency's demand response service. That means if your agency requires passengers to reserve a trip prior to a certain time the day before, please report 1 day for question 9. If your agency's demand response services have different reservation times, please report the shortest reservation time of the services. Great. One more. Okay. For question 10, so now we're at the last question. So really we had a lot of questions for 8, 9, and 10 last year. So for this question, please report the most commonly charged fare for your agency's demand response services, excluding special discounts. If the service does not require fares but accepts donations, please do not report a value for question 10. Please keep in mind that this is different than the RR20, where you would report donations made on board the vehicle as passenger fares. As a reminder, for the B15 form, the data will pre-populate from last year's report, so you'll just need to make any updates based on any changes from the prior year. In report year 2024, you'll just, again, need to review the data and revise as needed. The heavy lift was last year. Another clarification for report year 2024 concerns agencies splitting data between multiple NTD reports. In this example, if two agencies have an agreement where one operates routes that span both agency service areas, the agency may split the service by reporting the route you operate. However, agencies may not split individual vehicle trips between NTD reports. This is usually seen for demand response mode. Again, if there is a mixing of passengers on a vehicle, the data must be reported by the operator of service. We will not be able to get the true cost of service otherwise. The final clarification for this year is for vehicles with adaptive seating capacities. Some vehicles have the ability to add or remove seats to increase cargo space or passenger accommodations. If your agency is reporting a vehicle with adaptive seating, please report the full seating capacity of the vehicle on the A30 form, regardless of the current configuration. For example, if a vehicle has the potential seating capacity of 15, but you only have 12 seats installed, please report the seating capacity of 15 for that vehicle. Great. Now, clarifications are good. We're going to move on to the system update. So what you'll see a little bit different from last year. Nothing huge. The View Previous Data link is a new feature that will allow you, as a reporter, to quickly reference the prior year's data on the same form. For example, when viewing the B10, you can select View Previous Year Data link to pull up the prior year's B10 form in a new window. This is available for all forms in the package, but it will not include any attachments such as the narrative report. So if you do need a narrative report from a prior year and you do not have access to it, please ask your analyst and we can pull that for you. All right. Question 8 of the B15 form, I'm not done with the B15 yet, everyone, has been updated to include low income as a service eligibility option. Low income is included in the same service eligibility column as age or disability. Please note that this column can be marked yes if the service is open to either option. It does not need to be both age and disability or age or disability, as well as low income exclusive. So we're just opening it up to all of the segments. All right, so new for the A30 prompt, another feature that, it's a great enhancement we have. It's a prompt that will now appear when updating active vehicles to 0. This prompt will ask you to confirm whether or not you wish to retire the fleet. As a reminder, please do not delete fleets on the A30 form unless they were added in error. And if you ever have a question as to whether or not to delete or retire, ask your analyst. I know Courtney's probably going to go over this 2 more times today, so we're going to get that straight by the end of today. All right, just a quick reminder to round out the section. The Unique Entity ID, or UEID, is an agency-specific identifier used to import agency information from SAM.gov. For agencies that have a UEID, please review the P10 form and confirm that your UEID is up to date or update it as needed for your subrecipients. Now, last year we went over a profile review, so we're just still, making sure everything is nice and cleaned up. All right, so this concludes the report year 2024 clarifications and updates. And next, we're going to move on to a review of NTD reporting fundamentals. Lots of definitions and acronyms incoming, everyone. All right, the service data reported to the NTD must be public transit. But what does that mean? Open to the public means the service is open to the general public except for segments as defined by age, disability, or low income. These terms should sound familiar. I just went over them in the B15. The service must also be shared ride, as in there must be an attempt to share the vehicle with other passengers. As mentioned here, neither the rider nor the driver may deny use of empty seats to another rider. Great. After determining if you can report the data, the mode level comes next. The 2 modes that are the most common modes reported by rural reporters are demand response, or DR, and bus mode, or MB. Bus service is defined as vehicle powered by a motor and containing fuel within. It includes services that have route deviation, point deviation, or deviated fixed route. So anytime that you're on a route and you may, move off of it a little bit, it's still considered a fixed route. Demand response service is defined as service scheduled in response to calls from passengers, such as a dial ride. These modes will be updated on the profile's P20 form. Wow. So really important acronyms on this page are MB or bus and DR or demand response. Another popular mode in the rural module is the commuter bus mode, not computer. To clarify, commuter bus operates with more than 5 miles of closed door service, and the same type of vehicles are consistently operated on the service. If you think you have both a bus and commuter bus service, please keep in mind that a vehicle shouldn't be used between those two modes on the same day. This also applies to the driver's work assignments, which are typically separate. If you are currently reporting both commuter bus and bus service, and you believe you may only need to report one mode, please contact your analyst for assistance so that we can help determine how it should be reported and provide steps on how to change this in the reporting system. The next topic, Okay, the next topic we'll cover is types of service. Okay, let's see here. Sorry, I skipped down one. I apologize. Okay, types of service. Currently NTD, there are two main types of service, directly operated or DO and purchase transportation or PT. Directly operated is when the service is operated by the agency and uses the agency's employees. Purchase transportation is when the vehicles are operated by the seller's employees. The service is branded as the buyer's, and the buyer is paying the full cost of the service. With purchase transportation category, there are three types. TX for services operated by a taxi provider, and TN for services operated by a transportation network company or TNC. If the service is operated by a contractor that is neither a taxi nor a TNC, the type of service would remain PT or purchase transportation. We do get questions on when is it PT and when is it TX if it is a purchase transportation agreement. And part of it is that the PT will have dedicated vehicles and the TX will have non-dedicated vehicles. So if you have any of those slightly trickier contracts, just let us know and we can help you out. After the mode and type of service is determined, the next question is, what data should you be collecting for these services? Here are some of the data points as well as the abbreviations that are used throughout this presentation and on the report. These data points are collected on a per mode and type of service basis, except for sponsored unlinked passenger trips, which are only collected by the demand response mode types. Again, these are common abbreviations and I will be referring to them as such throughout the presentation. So VRM, VRH, BOMS, it's not VOMS, we don't say that, UPT and SUPT, but I usually end up saying sponsored UPT. Doesn't roll off the tongue as well. Great. Now we're going to cover what is revenue service. So let's go ahead and cover that. Vehicle revenue miles or VRM and vehicle revenue hours are VRH. So revenue service is when the vehicles are transporting passengers or able to transport passengers. This includes layover and recovery time. Revenue service does not include deadhead, driver training, school bus or charter services, and vehicle maintenance. The main point you need to have, you have to have the expectation of carrying passengers. But what is deadhead and why isn't it reported? Deadhead is when there is no expectation of carrying passengers. This includes leaving or returning to the garage or yard facility or changing routes. There are detailed tables found within the NTD policy manual, which provide further examples of what is and what is not considered revenue service, and we will be reviewing those tables in a few slides. Some transportation services, such as meal delivery services or other non-passenger services, are not reportable to the NTD as they do not meet FTA's definition of public transportation. Please omit the operating expenses and the service data from these services for the NTD report. As an exception or a little star on this, if 5311 funding is used for any of these types of projects, please report the funds that the funds that were spent in the funding line, but please omit them from the operating expenses by mode and type of service. And we'll make sure to go over what I'm talking about in a little bit when we go over the RR20. Here's the table for the demand response mode that I was just talking about a couple slides ago of what is and is not considered revenue service. Please note that the time and the miles from when the vehicle is dispatched from the garage to pick up a passenger are not considered revenue service until they reach a pickup point. On the other end of that example, the time and miles from the last drop off back to the dispatching point are also not considered revenue service. So this is demand response. Demand response is a little different from the bus mode. So following up on the previous slide, this is a rundown of what is and is not considered revenue service for bus mode. Again, from the garage to the first stop of the route is not considered revenue service. And from the last drop off point back to the garage is also not revenue service. Both of these tables, again, are found in the policy manual and can be helpful to review if you have any questions as to what to report for revenue service, or even if any of your drivers have questions as to what and what is not, revenue service. The next topic I'd like to go over is trip brokering. So trip brokering, as defined by FTA, is a central clearinghouse that connects riders traveling between similar origins and destinations at an approximately the same time. The service is reportable if brokers connect riders from client-specific transportation services to public transportation. Agencies should report the service data and revenue received from this program as organization-paid fares. Please note that trip brokerage must still be considered public transportation to be reported. Accepting passengers through a brokerage from a general public demand response program does not make the vehicle open to the public. Additionally, if a client-specific nonprofit provides trips assigned by a broker, then those trips are also not public transportation and should not be reported. If you have any instances of these and you want to get a little bit more into the weeds, we're more than happy to do that. All right. Moving on to unlinked passenger trips, or UPT, this number should represent the number of passengers boardings during the reporting period. Passengers are counted each time they board the vehicle, no matter how many vehicles they use from their origin to their destination. When reporting unlinked passenger trips, please include all passengers. These passengers are usually classified as regular or sponsored. When reporting UPT on the RR20 form, this should be the total number of passenger trips, both regular and sponsored. For demand response mode, again, you will report sponsored trips as a subset of the total trips. I'll be going over what sponsored trips are right now. Sponsored trips are those that are paid in part or in full by a third party. These trips may be part of a coordinated human services transportation plan. Common sponsors are the VA, Medicaid, and assisted living centers. As mentioned in the last slide, sponsored UPT should be reported as a subset of total unlinked passenger trips for all demand response modes. What does that mean? If you have 20 sponsored unlinked passenger trips and 80 regular unlinked passenger trips, then you would have 100 total unlinked passenger trips. So you'd report 100 and then you report 20 under sponsored unlinked passenger trips. Courtney will show you what that looks like once we get to the RR20 slide. Vehicles operated in annual maximum service, or VOMS, are the number of revenue vehicles an agency operates to meet the annual maximum service requirement. VOMS are counted during the peak season of the year on the busiest day. This count should include any volunteer vehicles that were used in maximum service. This shouldn't be the number of active vehicles your agency has in service, but rather how many vehicles are used at once during peak service. Again, we're looking for a snapshot of one point during the day, not the entire fleet of vehicles used over the course of the day. So if you have 8 total vehicles during the day, 4 in the morning, 4 at night, your VOM would be 4, in other words. Great. Now that we're done with the service data definitions, we're going to talk about financial requirements. NTD reporting requirements for financial data follow generally accepted accounting principles in accrual accounting. In accrual accounting, the revenue is recorded when earned, regardless of when payment is received. And expenses are recorded when the liability occurs, regardless of when the payment is made. Please see the examples here in the policy manual for more detail. All right, now that you know what to report, you'll want to make sure to report the amount that the agency expended during the fiscal year, not the amount that you may have been awarded. Here in the slide is an example. If your agency was awarded $275,000, but you only spent $178,000 of that amount, you would only report the $178,000 instead of the $275,000 that was awarded. Make sure everything matches up in your fiscal years. Next, we're going to review the types of expenses. First up is operating expenses. Operating expenses are the day-to-day expenses that a transit agency incurs. These may be for operating and maintaining vehicles, maintaining other equipment, planning costs, admin costs, as well as other examples seen here. Capital expenses are those related to the purchase of equipment. Equipment means an article of non-expendable personal property having a useful life of more than 1 year. The equipment will have an acquisition cost which equals the lesser of the capitalization level established by the government unit for financial statement purposes, or $5,000 as of this year, determined by FTA. If that amount changes, our slides will change. Again, you may have a lower limit than the established limit, and that is perfectly acceptable. Lastly, we're going to cover capital assistance spent in operations. This is when capital funding is spent on activities that are normally considered operating, such as preventative maintenance and the purchase of tires. Please make sure to break this amount out from your other operating funding line items, as this has a different matched percentage. There's a separate field on this for the RR20 form for certain funding sources like 5311 or 5310. Sorry, I didn't proceed, but this is the capital assistance spent on operations slide. All right. The next financial item I'd like to cover is what to do when your agency reports multiple modes and you need to allocate expenses for shared costs. In this case, your agency has more than 2 modes, and the operating costs will be broken up between the modes based on the direct and shared expenses. Once the direct expenses for each mode are identified and broken out, the remaining shared expenses may be calculated between the modes based on cost allocation method. Please note that this is only acceptable for shared expenses. There should be some expenses that are direct to each mode, such as fuel, wage, and marketing materials. Switching gears into reporting assets. Here is a quick overview of the TAM rule. Those that receive Chapter 5311 funds, Chapter 53 funds in general, and either own, operate, or manage capital assets used in the provision of public transportation services are required to report data for their assets. For recipients of 5310 B1D, if they do not provide public transportation services, they are not required to report under the TAM rule. With regards to how the data is reported, for those in the sponsored state DOT plan, the state will report the assets associated with the plan on your A90 for all your subrecipients. If your subrecipients have their own TAM plan, you will report assets and the targets, as well as a narrative report on each agency's A90 form located in their own package. States may have tier 2 participants as part of their TAM plan, and these will be mostly consist of those 5311 managed subrecipients, 5310 asset only subrecipients, and small urban providers. States are required to sponsor a plan. However, agencies may opt out of the plan, but must submit the target and narrative report data themselves if this is the case, as I mentioned in the previous slide. We will mention capital responsibility multiple times throughout this presentation with regards to TAM plans. Please see the list here to determine whether or not an agency has direct capital responsibility for an asset. As a note for the third bullet point, an infrastructure asset itemized as a capital line item in the budget does not necessarily mean an agency has direct capital responsibility. An agency must also have management or oversight responsibilities for the line item project. In addition, performing minimal preventative maintenance work doesn't necessarily indicate direct capital responsibility. All right, lastly, I want to go over the A90 with regards to the narrative report. You will upload your narrative through the A90 interface as seen here. If you need access to a prior year's narrative report, again, please contact your analyst for assistance. Please note that this should be a narrative of your targets year over year and not your TAM plan. All right, now we've completed a high-level review of the definitions and acronyms of the NTD reporting. We've gotten through the slog of it. Next, we're going to go over the NTD interface and user management. The NTD homepage is found here. This is where the data products, policy manuals, and clickable links to get into the reporting system are housed. From there, once you actually click on the reporting system, you're going to click on a blue link that says, if you are a non-FTA user, click this login. From there, it will prompt you to go to login.gov. Please make sure that this is set up with the same email address you use for NTD reporting. You may have multiple, just let us know which one you need. In addition to the email and password, login.gov will require the use of at least one secondary authentication method, such as code delivered through a text message or phone call. Once set up, whichever method was chosen will be used when logging into the NTD reporting system. Please note, if you need to reset your password or you forget your password, you will not do it through that Appian login. You will do it through login.gov. After logging in, all users land on the home page. The Appian platform, which houses NTD, trams, and faces, are here. Here, you're going to select NTD in order to access your report. If you would like to automatically go into the NTD every time you log in, you can click the star at the top right of the NTD box, and this will save your preference. The NTD homepage allows you to directly access your NTD report from the front page by selecting either the folder icon or the pencil icon. Next is the tasks tab. This section will house any tasks that are assigned to you, such as report year kickoff if you're an October reporter. To access your report packages, you want to ensure that you are on the home page. From there, you will select it. 1 second. Oh dear. Ooh. Okay. From here, you can select the annual tab and it will populate any open NTD reports for your agency. You can access the form one of two ways. You can either click on the NTD with the folder icon on the left, which will direct you to the report package summary page. This route will also allow you to access related actions for the package. If you'd only like to edit the forms, you can click on the pencil icon to the right-hand side of the page, and the system will take you directly to the clickable list of forms to edit. Another way to review your subrecipients is going to your state package and then clicking on subrecipient packages. To access the reporter profiles, you will still want to ensure you're on the home page or tab. You'll select profile and your agency's profiles will load. The profile is where you will edit your subrecipient modes, anyone's basic information, as well as other users from your agency. To view the individual forms, you'll click on the pencil icon to the right-hand side of the page, which will allow you to access the P10, P20, and other profile forms, such as the P50 for the GTFS link. To access other profile options, click the NTD ID folder icon on the left. Please note that you may see agencies that you no longer report on behalf of. This is stored so that you may go back and review past submissions and subrecipients as needed. Once you click on, on the NTD folder on the left, you'll see the profile summary page. Here you can go through related actions to edit the P form that I just mentioned. Next is the e-file library. This is where you can filter through communications from prior years as well as this report year. This will also host your closeout letter. The form library is where you can see data from previous years that have been submitted to the NTD. Again, you can view it from the packages themselves, but you may want to review a year prior, for example. You can use the dropdown to select what package you want, then the link in blue for whichever form you want. These will be in a downloadable HTML format. In addition to viewing the forms under related actions of the profile, you'll be able to print the previous year's report packages in full rather than form by form. Other actions you can complete are viewing and editing the profile forms or just the profile forms in general. The P50 would be listed on here if you had a fixed route mode on this example, but states don't have fixed route mode, so you're not seeing them here. If you select the print button to download the selected annual report package, you will be taken to a new page that you'll see a refresh button and you'll just wait a few minutes. to get that done. I am so sorry, I have a frog in my throat. So again, click on refresh and the downloadable link will appear under your agency's name. As seen here, it kind of hides a little bit, so we wanted to make sure we pointed it out to you. All right. On to users. Each agency must have at least one user manager. This person will be able to add, remove, and edit users within your agency. Additionally, if you are a self-reporting state, this user will be the user manager for your subrecipient agencies, where you can add or remove users from your subrecipient agencies as well. For further information, please see the link here or contact your analyst. Here are the user roles within the NTD reporting system. Please note that there can only be one CEO and NTD contact. There must be a CEO in order to submit the report. Otherwise, the CEO delegate can do all the same actions as the CEO, and the NTD contact can submit the packages after the original submission. If you're already a user in the system and need to unlock your account, there are two different ways to complete this. You can either unlock your own account if you have set up security questions, which we'll go over in the next slide, or you can submit an unlock request. If you submit an unlock request, you will go to your agency's user managers. It is important to note that even if you are locked out, you can still log into the NTD system. As mentioned, if you set up your security questions beforehand, you'll be able to unlock your own account. I'm so sorry.
Hey, Bailey, this is Courtney speaking here. I am more than happy to take over the last few slides here. I think we're about to do our transition anyway, so just let me know and I'm happy to take over the screen share.
Okay, no problem. I got it. Just don't know what's going on. Anyway, to set up your questions, first go to the top right-hand corner of your screen and select Profile, click on Related Actions, then Manage Security Questions. From there, the system will provide steps on to create those security questions. Actually, Court, can you take over?
Absolutely. Give me just one moment to get everything set up here. Okay. All right, I just want to make sure that everyone can see my screen. Are we still looking at slide 74?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Great, so as Bailey mentioned, if you have set up your security questions beforehand, you will be able to unlock your own account. To set up your questions, first go to the top right-hand corner of your screen and select the profile icon, and then select Related Actions, and finally select Manage Security Questions. From there, the system will provide steps to create your security questions. Self-reporting subrecipients have the ability to enter and edit data for their forms. This privilege is granted by state DOTs and is completely optional and at your discretion. While self-reporting subrecipients can edit and save forms, just note that the state DOT is still the one who will submit the annual report. Subrecipients should contact the state DOT for any questions or technical assistance needed while completing their reports. And all correspondence with the NTD analyst should go through the state DOT contact. Okay, so next we'll cover the report year kickoff to start the year. Okay, so the report year kickoff will appear as a task in the task list for NTD contacts, CEO delegates, and CEO users. You will need to click on the task, click on accept, and then proceed. And this will assign the task to your account. You will next verify the users on your P30 users form. If any users need to be updated, you can complete the kickoff first and then ask your user manager to make those updates. If you need any additional user managers added to your state DOT's NTD profile, please contact your analyst. After reviewing the users, you will review your subrecipients. The list from last report year, so 2023, will pre-populate in a grid as seen here. During this step, you can also add new subrecipients from a list of existing subrecipients. If you need to add a new subrecipient, you can do so at the bottom of that page. However, please do not add a subrecipient unless you have the required basic information ready to input. Do not toggle off of this page if you're in the middle of completing it. If you need to add new subrecipients, you can complete the kickoff and then go to the state's related actions page to add or remove subrecipients after the kickoff has been completed. After the subrecipients have been confirmed, the next page, you'll be able to update the subrecipient type if needed. And again, the prior year's subrecipient type will pre-populate. And then you will check off the participants in your TAM plan. Please note that RGPT subrecipients will be automatically marked as part of your state's TAM plan, and you will need to uncheck the box if needed so that their A90 forms can populate in their report packages. Next, you will be able to select which agencies are self-reporting, meaning that you'll have the individual subrecipient go in and update their data and answer their validation issues. And then you will be able to click on Submit to complete the kickoff. Once you click on Submit, you'll see this box populate stating that the kickoff has been complete and that it may take a couple of minutes just to populate all of the forms. This may take longer to populate based on how large your agency is. So you'll select OK and then go back to the NTD homepage. If you have any issues with your kickoff or any of the subrecipients on your list, please contact your analyst. All right, so that covers the kickoff. It's now time to enter the data on your annual report forms. So I will be taking us through the rest of this webinar, and we're going to start with how to complete the 2024 annual report. So here's the definition of the Rural General Public Transit, or RGPT, subrecipient type, as well as a list of their annual report forms. RGPT subrecipients are agencies that provide rural service and receive or benefit from 5311 funding, excluding urban agencies who also receive 5307 funding and also excluding tribes. We will cover each of these forms in more detail in the upcoming sections. Here's the definition of the asset-only subrecipient type and their list of report forms. Asset-only subrecipients are agencies that receive or benefit from FTA Chapter 53 funding other than 5307 or 5311 funds and own, operate, or manage capital assets that are used to provide public transportation services. Here's the definition of intercity bus subrecipients and their report forms. These subrecipient types only complete the B10 form and an abbreviated RR20 form, where they report their Section 5311 funding, as well as the vehicle revenue miles and unlinked passenger trips corresponding to their 5311 funded service. Urban or tribal subrecipients report directly to the NTD and submit their own annual report packages. However, if they receive 5311 funds from the state, you must complete a 5311 summary report for this agency in the state's report package. So in these reports, you complete the B10 form and an abbreviated RR20 form where you report only their Section 5311 funding. To begin reporting, navigate to the NTD homepage and with the Annual tab selected, open either the state's report package or open an individual subrecipient's report package. From the state's report package summary view, select the Annual Forms button in the top right-hand corner to open the state DOT's report forms, which are the A90 or RU30 forms. You may also select the Subrecipient Reports tab to open the subrecipient grid. The subrecipient grid shows all subrecipient report packages contained within the state DOT report. You can select a subrecipient's name to open their individual report package. You can also sort this table by a few different criteria, including open validation issues. So this can help you easily review which subrecipient reports have outstanding issues that would prevent submission. You can also select the Related Actions tab from the state's report summary page. This menu provides an option to open your report forms, so select Annual Forms to open the editable list of forms. Once the list of forms is open, you can select the hyperlinked form name to begin reporting. We will start by reviewing the report forms for a rural general public transit subrecipient, and then we'll cover the state-specific forms towards the end. The first subrecipient form we will review is the Basic Information or Identification B10 form. If you completed an annual NTD report for this subrecipient last year, the organization type you selected will carry over into this year's form. So review this selection to ensure that it is correct. You should also review the fiscal year end date that pre-populates in this field. This date corresponds to the 12-month period for this agency's 2024 report data, and this date may differ from the state DOT's fiscal year end. The auxiliary sections are typically rare for rural agencies, so please do not complete this section without discussing it first with your analyst. When you have completed this form, select Save and Validate. Next, we will discuss the Geographic Area Coverage B15 form. This form will only appear in a subrecipient's report if they operate a demand response or DR mode. Beginning last report year, agencies were required to respond to 10 questions related to their geospatial data. If you completed the B15 form for a given subrecipient last year, your responses will pre-populate in this year's report. So you should review those responses to ensure they are up to date. We will review each of the 10 questions presented in this report form. Some of the questions will be dynamic based on your selections to previous questions. So question 1 asks if the subrecipient serves residents in another state besides your state. Select yes or no. Question 2 allows you to select the counties that the agency serves, either in whole or in part. You should start by selecting Add, after which you can choose your state and report the counties. Question 3 allows you to select the census places that are served within those counties. You can download the counties and census places reference file directly from the reporting system. This report is an Excel file that populates based on the counties you entered in question 2 and will contain all of the corresponding census places so that you can complete question 3. Once you have reported the census places, you can then select the service level by indicating whether the census places are wholly served or partially served. Question 4 asks if any portion of this service is intended to meet the Americans with Disabilities Act complementary paratransit requirements for a fixed route mode. Select yes or no. If you select yes, question 5 asks if the service area is limited to this particular agency's, so this subrecipient's NTD ID, and if it is, select yes. If this agency's ADA service serves other NTD reporters, select no. And if you select no, you should search for and select all other NTD IDs that this ADA service covers. Question 6 asks if you have different passenger eligibility requirements or different terms and conditions of service. Select yes or no. Question 7 asks which days per week you operate. So select the checkboxes for each applicable day and then select Create Days of the Week on the right-hand side of this page, which will then populate question 8. For question 8, you will report the service begin and end time for each day. You will also answer basic questions about these services as seen in the column headers under question 8 as shown in the screenshot, and Bailey had discussed the recent reporting clarifications for this question at the beginning of this presentation. Question 9 asks for the minimum advanced reservation time for this service. Enter the numeric minimum and then select either hours or days. Finally, question 10 asks for the fare charged for this service. you should not include donations in this field. We encourage you to contact your validation analyst if you have any questions about this report form. Next, we will discuss the A10 form, stations and maintenance facilities. The A10 captures the type and number of maintenance facilities the subrecipient utilizes for public transit. Report facilities based on the ownership types for those facilities. So whether they are owned by the agency, leased from another public agency, or leased from a private entity. The definition of general purpose maintenance facility is a garage or building where mechanics typically perform routine maintenance and repairs. General purpose maintenance facilities typically serve as operating garages where agencies store and dispatch vehicles for revenue service. Please note that you should not include bus barns in this count, nor should you include any third-party facility where an agency might bring their vehicles for repairs, such as a Jiffy Lube, for example. If one facility is shared by 2 or more modes, you should report an allocated share between those modes. This could be based on any data point that indicates how much of the facility is used per mode, but one common approach is to allocate the facility based on the number of vehicles it services. So to look at an example, let's say an agency owns one maintenance facility and operates both a demand response service and a fixed route bus service. The agency owns 20 vehicles in total. The demand response mode runs 15 vehicles and the bus mode runs 5 vehicles. In this example, we would expect to see 0.75 facilities reported in the demand response A10 form and 0.25 facilities reported in the bus A10 form. And please ensure that the total number of facilities you report across all A10 forms equals a whole number. Next, we will discuss the Transit Asset Management Facilities Inventory A15 form. The A15 form collects basic information on facilities that the subrecipient uses to supply public transit service. On this form, you should report administrative and maintenance facilities for which the agency has capital responsibility, and you should report all passenger and parking facilities that the agency uses in public transit service, regardless of who has capital responsibility for those facilities. Please note that if you report a maintenance facility as owned on the A10 form, we would generally expect that facility to appear on the A15 form as well, as long as the agency's transit use for that facility is greater than incidental. To complete this form, select the Add New button, followed by Add Facility. This will allow you to begin entering data between 3 different sections: update facility information, update condition assessment, and update address. We will not dedicate time to going over each of these individual sections, but we do encourage you to review the NTD policy manual or contact your analyst if you have any questions about any specific report fields or definitions. Your existing facility information will pre-populate from report year 2023, so you will only need to add new facilities or update existing facilities if needed. If the subrecipient does not have any reportable facilities, please select the No Data to Report checkbox prior to saving this form. Next, we will review the Revenue Vehicle Inventory A30 form. If you completed this form last year, the data from report year 2023 will pre-populate, which again means you will only need to add new fleets or edit existing fleets, again as needed. You can enter new fleets by selecting the Add New Fleet button, or you can edit an existing fleet by selecting the RVI ID link for that fleet towards the left of the table. When adding a new fleet, the first section you will see is Basic Information. You should complete all required fields for this fleet. And some examples of the required fields include vehicle type, total vehicles, ownership type, and funding type. The next section is vehicle information. Again, complete all required fields in this section. Fuel type was introduced as a new field for our GPT and reduced asset subrecipients last year, so report year 2023. The selections that you reported last year will again pre-populate along with the rest of the fleet data. Transit agencies must report the number of active vehicles in each fleet as of the end of their fiscal year. Active vehicles represents the number of vehicles that regularly provide revenue service and includes spare vehicles or vehicles temporarily out of service for routine maintenance. Inactive vehicles may include vehicles that are awaiting sale or disposal, vehicles that are in storage or are part of an FTA-approved emergency contingency plan, or vehicles that are out for long-term major repairs. As a quick reporting reminder, please remember to mark fleets as retired in the reporting system if the vehicles have been sold or disposed of, rather than deleting the fleets. To retire a fleet, update the number of active vehicles to 0, and when you report 0 active vehicles, the system will provide this prompt asking, is this fleet retired, which you should select as yes. Fleets should typically only be deleted if they were added to the form in error, or if you are removing a duplicate fleet after using the add existing fleet function. The next form is the Service Vehicle Inventory A35 form. Agencies must report service vehicle fleets for which they have capital responsibility. Service vehicles include cars used for administrative staff, tow trucks, or service trucks. Because service vehicles must be roadworthy, agencies should not report small forklifts or golf carts or any type of construction equipment that is not roadworthy. To create a fleet, select Add New. Please ensure that you do not report revenue vehicles on the A35 form. This form should only include service vehicles. If a vehicle is used for both purposes, report it on the A30 form only. Report the service fleet information for this vehicle fleet. Select the vehicle type from a drop-down menu, which consists of 3 options: automobiles, trucks and other rubber tire vehicles, and steel wheel vehicles. Automobiles are passenger cars up to and including station wagons in size. If you have a service vehicle that is a minivan or anything larger, you should report them as trucks and other rubber tire vehicles. And steel wheel vehicles are typically reported by larger urban agencies with rail modes, so you may disregard this option. Estimated cost is the most recent estimate of the full cost to replace the fleet. If you do not have a recent estimate, you may report the original cost of the fleet or its insured value. You must also report the year that corresponds to the dollar value you report. Save and validate the A35 form once you are finished. Again, if this agency does not have any reportable service vehicles, select the No Data to Report checkbox prior to saving the form. The Rural General Public Transit Reduced Reporting, or RR20 form, contains an agency's financial, service, and resource data. When you open the RR20 form, the first 2 sections you see will be total funds expended and funds expended by mode. The funds expended section allows you to manually input your operating and capital expenses for each mode that you operate. In this example, this agency operates 2 modes: demand response, directly operated, and motor bus, directly operated. The agency reported an annual total of $325,000 in operating expenses and $250,000 in capital expenses, and they reported the corresponding annual totals for each mode in their respective fields. And please note that these totals are rounded for example purposes only. So you should report all funds that your agency expended towards public transit service. Do not limit your expenses to federal grant programs only. In the subsequent sections of the RR20 form, you will identify the various sources of funds that supported this transit system. And we will cover the different funding source categories in the next few slides. As you begin to report the funding sources, the system will automatically calculate a running total in the total funds expended section. Again, in this example, the agency has reported all of their funding sources, which totaled $325,000 in operations and $250,000 in capital. The sum of your funding sources typically match what you entered in the funds expended section as shown in the screenshot on the slide. The operating expenses match as shown by the totals in red, and the capital expenses match as shown by the totals in green. Agencies that operate more than one mode are required to capture and report actual expenses by mode and type of service. If an agency reports more than one mode, you should determine which expenses are direct expenses and can be easily traced to a specific mode. Direct costs may include driver wages or vehicle repairs for specific modes. For the remaining joint or shared expenses, which are costs that are incurred for the benefit of more than one mode and cannot be traced, you may allocate those remaining costs. An example of a shared cost may be a transit manager's salary that supports both modes. You may allocate shared costs by using an allocation factor, such as vehicle revenue miles, unlinked passenger trips, vehicle revenue hours, or number of employees per mode. The next section of the RR20, which begins the different funding source categories, is fare revenues. Fare revenues include all income received and expended directly from passengers, which include donations made on board a transit vehicle. This section is broken down between passenger paid fares and organization paid fares. It's also broken down by mode and type of service, if the agency reports two or more modes or types of service. Passenger paid fares reflect the amount of the fare that the passengers pay on their own behalf. This category includes full adult fares, senior citizen fares, student fares, child fares, and fares for individuals with disabilities. This section also includes donations that are made on board a vehicle in lieu of paying a fare. Organization paid fares are those that an organization pays for or pays through a third party rather than the passenger. One common example of an organization paid fare is a university paying a transit agency to allow students to ride fare-free. Funds expended from Medicaid for non-emergency medical transportation, or NEMT, should be reported as an organization paid fare. If an agency operates more than one mode, they must capture and report the fares by mode and type of service. There are some exceptions to this requirement, as listed here on the slide. If a subrecipient's fare policy meets either of these criteria, please communicate that to your analyst during validation. In most cases, however, fare revenues can be tracked for each mode and therefore should be reported as actual data and not allocated. The next funding source in the form is other directly generated funds, which are funds that an agency earns from other transit-related services. Some common examples of other directly generated funds are advertising revenues, concession revenues, fundraisers, park and ride revenues, interest on investments, contract revenue for any non-full cost contracts, donations, and insurance recoveries. When we say donations for this field, this refers to lump sum donations that are issued directly to the transit agency. Again, this does not refer to donations made by passengers upon boarding the vehicle, since those are reported as passenger paid fares. If you report funds to this field, a required text description box will appear. The next funding source category is revenues accrued through a purchased transportation or PT agreement. You should only report funds to this section if a subrecipient receives revenues from another agency who pays the full cost of a transit service the subrecipient provides. This agreement must meet the NTD definition of purchased transportation. It's not common for rural agencies to report funds to this field, so please discuss this with your analyst before reporting any new funds to this field. The next funding source category is non-federal funds. Report the funds the agency expended from local, state, and other non-federal sources. Local sources include tax levies, general funds, and finances from local entities. State sources include state programs that support public transit, but do not include the Chapter 53 funds that your state DOT passes through to subrecipients, since Chapter 53 funds are federal in origin. If you report other funds similar to other directly generated funds, a text description box will appear, so ensure that you enter a description of those funds. In the federal funds section, select all applicable federal funding sources from this list of programs. Once you select a category, the corresponding data entry field will populate to the right. If you report any funds to any of the other categories, such as other federal funds or other FTA funds, again, you will be required to provide a text description just to specify that funding program. Some examples of other FTA funds include those not already listed on the RR20 form, such as Section 5308, FTA Clean Fuels Program. Examples of other federal funds include funds from a non-FTA or non-DOT federal grant not already listed in the form, such as Housing and Urban Development or Department of Health and Human Services funds. Other US DOT funds include funds that come from the Department of Transportation that are not FTA funds, such as funds from the Federal Highway Administration. The various COVID-19 relief programs, such as the CARES Act, CRISA Act, and American Rescue Plan Acts, are listed separately in the RR20 form, so please report funds expended from these programs to the appropriate field. After you complete the financial data section, complete the other resources section if it is applicable to your agency. Report the number of volunteer drivers and/or the number of personal vehicles in service. As a quick reporting note, do not report volunteers' personal vehicles on the A30 form. You should only report a count of vehicles in this section. If this section does not apply to this agency, enter zeros into these data entry fields rather than leaving the fields blank. The next section in the form is annual service data. When reporting miles and hours, you should only include those miles and hours in which transit vehicles are operating in revenue service, which is when the vehicles are either transporting passengers or have the capacity to transport passengers. Unlinked passenger trips should reflect each instance in which a passenger boards a vehicle and should include personal care attendants who ride fare-free. The total unlinked passenger trips should represent all ridership for the year, including regular and sponsored trips. So in other words, even though agencies report sponsored service UPT in a separate field for certain modes, you should not deduct the sponsored UPT from the total UPT. Next, we will discuss the Safety and Security SNS 60 form. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law requires the NTD to collect data related to assaults on transit workers. Agencies who report to the NTD must report all assaults on transit workers, even if the assault does not result in an injury. RGPT and reduced asset subrecipients began reporting expanded safety data in the new SNS 60 form beginning in report year 2023. Here's an overview of the first two sections in the SNS 60 form. They are physical assaults and non-physical assaults. And we will cover the different assault types and the different location options in the next few slides. Transit worker assaults can be categorized as either physical or non-physical. Physical attacks involve physical contact with a transit worker and can include any contact with the attacker's body, a weapon, a projectile, or another item. Physical assaults can also include the assailant's saliva. Non-physical assaults do not involve any physical contact and can include things like threats, intimidation, or interfering with the worker's duties. Here are the 4 different location options. On the first screenshot, we have physical assaults in transit vehicle, physical assaults in revenue facility, physical assaults in non-revenue facility, and physical assaults in other location. The options are identical for non-physical assaults. The definitions for each option can be found in the NTD policy manual for reduced reporters, so please refer to this resource or contact your analyst if you have any questions. The third and final section of the SNS 60 form is all other reportable safety and security data. The first 3 rows refer to the following collision types: collisions with pedestrians, collisions with vehicles, and collisions with other, which can include things like an animal or a manhole or a shopping cart. Please note that you should only report safety events to these categories if they meet a major event reporting threshold, which are outlined again in the NTD policy manual. If you have any reportable collisions that meet this criteria, you should report an annual count under the major events column. You should then report any corresponding fatalities or injuries resulting from the collision, if any are applicable. Next, report a count of other major events, which are major safety events excluding collisions that meet a major event reporting threshold. Some examples of other major event types include fires, security events, hazardous material spills, or acts of God. Report a count of other major events in this section, as well as any resulting injuries or fatalities if applicable. And again, the reporting thresholds for major events are detailed in the NTD policy manual for reduced reporters. We do encourage you to review these thresholds or again, reach out to your analyst if you have questions. The last field in this section is total reportable injuries from non-major events. These are events that are not included in the major event categories listed in the manual. So non-major event types include slips, trips, falls, smoke events, fumes, and electric shock. If any of these events result in a fatality, evacuation, or property damage exceeding $25,000, you should report them as major events. You should also report these as major events if they result in 2 or more injured persons. If these events do not meet the fatality, evacuation, or property damage thresholds and only result in 1 injury, you should report them under total reportable injuries from non-major events. So for example, if a smoke event results in 1 injury, that would be reported in the field total reportable injuries from non-major events. If the same smoke event resulted in 2 injuries, that would be reported under other major events with 2 corresponding injuries. So that was an overview of the report forms that will appear in subrecipient report packages. We'll now review the state's report forms, starting with the statewide characteristics RU30 form. The RU30 is a summary form for statewide characteristics and will pre-populate the number of counties statewide. Report the number of counties with 5311 service, which represents the total number of counties in the state that are served, either in whole or in part, by 5311 funded operators. And you should include counties that are served by directly reporting Indian tribes. A county is considered to be served if an agency picks up or drops off passengers in that county. Next, report the total 5311 funds that were expended on state administration during the fiscal year. If this sum significantly changes from the value you reported last year, your analyst may ask about this during validation. Next, we will discuss the Transit Asset Management Performance Measure Targets, or A90 form. Agencies report the portion of their assets which have met or exceeded their useful life benchmark. The A90 form compares the current year targets to the live data that's pulled directly from the current year's asset forms. So for this report year, the form will compare the 2024 targets, which were set in report year 2023, against the data in the live 2024 report forms. For revenue and service vehicles, the system looks at the reported useful life benchmarks. For facilities, the system looks at the reported condition assessments. Again, state DOTs report on behalf of their managed and independent participants and completes a single A90 form that represents the whole group. The first section in the A90 form, rolling stock, refers to the revenue vehicles on the participants' A30 forms. The performance measure refers to the percent of vehicles that have met or exceeded their useful life benchmarks. To complete this section, report the 2025 performance target. The performance target refers to the percent of vehicles that you expect will have met or exceeded their useful life benchmarks by next year. Select NA for any asset types that do not apply to your group TAM plan. Each asset type must either have a target reported or have the NA checkbox selected. The second section is equipment, which refers to service vehicles reported on the participants' A35 forms. The performance measure and targets work the same way as they do for rolling stock. So report the 2025 target, which represents the percentage of service vehicles in each category that you expect will meet or exceed the useful life benchmarks by next year. The third section is facility, which refers to the facilities that you report on the participants' A15 forms. This section calculates the performance measure based on the percentage of facilities that rate below a 3 on FTA's term scale, which ranges from 1 to 5. You should also upload your group TAM plan's narrative report at the bottom of this form. The narrative report outlines the targets that you reported in the A90 form, the progress towards those targets, and any changes within the transit system's operating environments that may impact the targets. Your group TAM plan participants will see a read-only version of the group's A90 form in their reports. Once you've completed the reports for all subrecipients, completed the state forms, and addressed all open validation issues, you should submit the annual report package. To begin, open the state DOT report package and select the Related Actions tab. Then select Submit Annual Report Package. Please note that only state users with the CEO or CEO delegate role can submit the original submission or first draft of the report. The NTD contact user can submit all subsequent revisions once the report is returned. If the report has any open issues, the system will notify you when you attempt to submit the report. Open issues can include unaddressed validation issues, non-validated report forms, or incomplete required fields. From this list, you can navigate directly to those forms to resolve the issues. If the report does not have any open issues, you can select Continue to proceed to the next page. This submission step is new for report year 2024 and relates to the general transit feed specification web links for your RGPT subrecipients who operate fixed route modes. This page will populate all of the applicable subrecipients and ask you to confirm that their GTFS web links are up to date. You must select yes or no for each subrecipient. If you need to update a subrecipient's GTFS web link, please open the individual agency's P50 profile form and make any necessary changes prior to submitting the state's annual report. Select Continue to proceed to the next step. The next submission step is the FFA 20 summary form, which provides basic information about the state DOT report package, including the current report year and report package version. The bottom of the FFA 20 form also provides some statewide aggregate data, such as the total vehicle revenue miles, vehicle revenue hours, unlinked passenger trips, and operating expenses. Once you're ready to submit the report package, select the Submit option at the bottom of the form. So that was an overview of the reporting process for state DOT reporters. Next, we will very quickly discuss some common reporting challenges agencies may face while completing the annual report. So reporting challenges can take shape in a variety of ways, including understanding the NTD policies, completing data entry correctly, completing all required forms and fields in the report, and addressing validation issues. Analysts will send reports back with open issues if they have follow-up questions regarding the report data. Validation includes, but is not limited to, time series checks against an agency's historical data, logic checks between data items on different forms, and checks for values that fall outside of the typical industry range. To resolve validation issues, you can either revise the data if the data requires a correction, or provide a text explanation that addresses the issue to establish accuracy. One common reporting issue relates to allocating operating expenses. So as a reminder, agencies who operate 2 or more modes may not allocate their total annual operating expenses. Rather, they must first determine which expenses are direct costs and attribute those costs to the appropriate mode. The agency may then allocate the remaining shared cost to each mode and type of service afterwards. Another validation issue reporters may experience relates to reporting the appropriate funding sources for their service. So please ensure that your subrecipients report all funds that support their public transit service, rather than, for example, only reporting the federal funding sources. Please also ensure that subrecipients report the funding sources to the correct line items year over year, such as local funds, state funds, other directly generated funds, and 5311 federal funds. Agencies should only report service data for when they're operating revenue service. Revenue service does not include deadhead, therefore deadhead should not be included in the data that's reported to the NTD. Deadhead is when transit vehicles are operating closed door and do not carry passengers. This includes leaving or returning to the garage or heading to or from the starting or ending points of revenue service. This can also include changing routes or when the driver does not have the duty to carry passengers. Vehicle revenue miles is an apportionment formula factor for 5311 funds, so this data is validated closely. Agencies should report the vehicles operated in maximum service, or VOMs, based on the number of revenue vehicles the agency operates to meet the annual maximum service requirement. This does include volunteer vehicles that operate during peak service periods. Agencies might erroneously report 100% of their active vehicle inventory as their VOMs, and this would be correct if your agency operated all of its active vehicles during peak service periods. However, agencies typically retain spare vehicles that do not operate during peak service times. If the VOMs you report on the RR20 form is identical to the number of active vehicles you report on the A30 form, your analyst may ask about this during validation. When agencies report new vehicles, they typically also report the corresponding capital expenses on the RR20 form. One validation issue that comes up is that agencies will either report the new vehicles on the A30 form or the capital expenses on the RR20 form, but not both. So as a reminder, you should report capital expenses for new vehicles on the RR20 form once the vehicle has been delivered and accepted by the agency. You should also add the vehicles to your inventory once the vehicle has been put into revenue service. These may fall between 2 different fiscal year periods, but they often fall within the same fiscal year. This slide is essentially a reiteration of the slide before this, so in the interest of time, we are going to go ahead and proceed to the next slide to make sure we close out on time. On the A90 form, agencies must report the next fiscal year's performance targets for all assets for which they have capital replacement responsibility, including their rolling stock, equipment, and facilities. One reporting issue that comes up is that an agency might report the current year's target rather than the next year's target. So during report year 2024, you should report the target for 2025. Another issue may be reporting a target that does not seem statistically realistic. Your analyst may ask about any targets that don't appear consistent with the current asset inventory. Subrecipient management is very important for state DOT reports, since the subrecipient list provides a picture of transit operators who receive federal program funds from the state. As a reminder, you can add or remove subrecipients for the year by navigating to the state report package, selecting related actions, and then select Manage Subrecipients. Some common reporting challenges here can include erroneously removing urban or tribal subrecipients because they report directly to the NTD. As a reminder, if these agencies receive 5311 funds from the state, you should submit the abbreviated subrecipient package for that agency. Other issues can include excluding intercity bus operators who receive 5311F funds or erroneously removing RGPT subrecipients with continuing grant requirements. All right, so after you submit the report, there are a couple more steps that must be taken to close out of the report for the year. Your validation analyst will review the entire report for accuracy and consistency. They'll compare the data in this year's report to the data in last year's report to look for any significant changes, ensure that all the forms are completed, and check to ensure that the data has been reported to the correct fields. If your analyst asks about any data changes from last year, please avoid providing generalized responses such as the data is correct, since these types of responses typically don't offer a clear explanation for why the data changed. The more information you can provide early in the reporting process, this can help reduce the number of report turnovers before closeout. Once your analyst has reviewed the report, they will return it so that you can resolve the open validation issues. As the report revision count increases, the revision time period will decrease, since the report should have fewer and fewer issues with each submission. Be sure to address any items that were cited in last year's closeout letter. Notes in the closeout letter typically relate to incomplete reports, and the criteria or some possibilities are listed on the slide here. If you respond to a validation issue and notice that your analyst has kept the issue open with a follow-up question, please avoid copying and pasting the same response from the original submission. If any of these issues occur, FTA will cite them in the closeout letter. The best way to resolve issues is to provide thorough and detailed explanations that give your analyst a clear picture of the agency's service. So you should explain why the data changed from year to year, or explain what service changes took place to cause a significant change in the data. If you happen to find that last year's data was incorrect, please provide the correct data if you happen to have it, or at least provide an explanation for why last year's data was incorrect. And just please note that FTA does not accept this response across multiple report years. And with that, with 1 minute to spare, that concludes our presentation for this afternoon. Here's the contact information for our team, as well as the help desk. We're open Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you all again for attending this afternoon. We hope the session was helpful. If you have any questions, please reach out to us, and I will turn it back over to Lori to close us out.